What's going on, everybody? Meteorologist Mike Linden back again for another video. Of course, if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to click on that subscribe button and don't forget to click on that notification bell. That way you always know whenever we drop a new video, whenever we go live. So much cool stuff coming to the YouTube channel. And of course, hurricane season rolls on and we have been live a lot. So be sure to, again, click that notification bell so you know when we are live. Of course, as well, be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. We are everywhere nowadays. So I'm really excited to speak with this next person here who was, you might have seen on our channel or on the app about a year or so ago. It's wild that it's been about a year, but we are so excited to speak with someone who has many titles, just to sneak a couple of them in here. Harvard Kennedy professor, a CNN national security analyst, a member of the Homeland Security Advisory Council, and so much more. Professor Juliette Kayyem, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. That was I have to get my energy up, but I'm doing great. It's great to be with you guys again. I love the platform and time with you, during Paradise to take, I had served in government as well. So I'd been, at the Department of Homeland Security to take sort of what I knew to a new place and a new platform. So great may not be the right word in the middle of a pandemic with hurricane season and fires, but we're in the business of bad news. So it is great to see you.
I appreciate it very much. And it is great to see you as well. But hey, I left off some titles, right? I mean, you were a former candidate for the governor. You worked for the Boston Globe.
Yeah.
Just a short list of accomplishments. But anyway, Julia, let's jump into what I wanted to talk to you about, and that is, of course, about wildfires. They are very much so in the news right now. Of course, 2020, what a year it's been for many reasons, and we're still not done with it yet. But hurricane season, I mean, this has been an absolutely historic year for hurricanes. Only the second time ever going into the Greek alphabet. But of course, that's kind of been the focus for a good chunk of the country, but for the Western United States, I mean, number one, it's been about wildfires with photos of, looking like you're on the planet Mars out of Oregon and out of California. But I wanted to talk to you specifically about those wildfires and what your experience was like in Paradise. Take me back to what you remember being, just being out there, being on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I dealt with disasters and crises. Something very hopeful about returning to a place. People's resiliency is incredible. Communities' resiliency is incredible. About learning from what happened and then the deaths and the destruction, and also building better. And so that's always sort of the positive side. I often say in my line of work, which is disaster management, just general disasters, if you could bottle the goodwill of communities that have faced a disaster and apply it to any other challenge in the world, you might actually accomplish things in life in terms of solving our systemic problems. So, and I saw a community talking to different people that was trying to do better based on an experiment that had failed. So what do I mean by that? I mean, look, Paradise and other communities were built on a experiment, which I don't want to say predated climate change, but has been challenged by climate change, and that's the wildland urban interface, right? Which is the idea that you could push the forest, you could live with the forest, you could move to the forest, build communities there, and survive and flourish. And the people we talked to, as you know from that video, were people who wanted that lifestyle, right? I mean, the quiet and in the nature. The problem is that very interface became, with climate change, a contributing factor in the kind of devastation we've seen because natural fires were not allowed because they were too risky. So you had too much density in the forest. And for someone who's not an expert, that was one of the most interesting sort of aha moments, that these natural fires were and forests were not the ones I was seeing. They're a lot less dense. Trees are a lot more separated. And the other was, I think, a real assessment of whether the experiment had run its course, that these fires were bigger, they were deadlier, that no amount of firefighter training could stop them. So you could have, you could build strong houses. You could have all the disaster management plans in place. You could increase lanes so that people could leave faster. But at some stage, you know, should these areas be abandoned? And that's essentially the question we asked about Paradise.
Yeah, the rebuild or retreat is a very very strong message. But Juliette, I wanted to ask you. I remember when at the beginning of that piece there, the gentleman who you spoke with initially, who lost his home,
Yeah.
He had said, you know, the phrase "paradise strong." You know, he disagrees with it, right? He said we're wounded.
Right.
I mean, let alone the fact that, you know, we're strong, which I thought was incredibly powerful of him to say something like that.
I think, right. And I think, and he eventually, the sort of story, that documentary we did together, was at the end, he decides not to move back, but he takes essentially the insurance money or the disaster relief money and moves elsewhere. And I think that's important because in an age of climate change, and this is from the policy perspective, because that's the world I live in terms of homeland security policy, strength may be in retreat. And I think that's what we're facing, not just with hurricanes, but with, ocean rising and fires. That actually, to protect people, which is your primary concern, but also communities and property, that some areas may be uninhabitable. And so the question for someone like me in the policy realm, remember, I'm not a first responder, I'm not an environmentalist. I think about how communities can prepare for and build more resilient. So one of the key issues is in Paradise is, we have an entire disaster relief system in this country that is premised on the belief that disasters are random and rare, right? This is how our disaster relief management system works, right? There but for the grace of God go I. So we put money into disaster relief funds so that when a community is hit, we pay them off because, my goodness, that could have been off, right? And we pay them. This is where our laws have not caught up with climate change, and we pay them to build. Essentially, we incentivize them to build exactly where they were. Well, guess what? I mean, I just have to watch, your all's programming. Disasters are no longer random and rare. I can predict with the high certainty where the fires are going to be, where the hurricanes are going to come, where the tornadoes may be, where the seas will rise. And if that's the case, from that perspective, thinking just about fires, maybe we should think about a system that treated retreat as a strength and incentivize people to leave. And in Paradise, you don't see that yet. So people are returning and they're building, and they talk about building better and de-densifying the forest and, wider lanes if there's money for that. But you look at Paradise, I should just remind people, it's sort of on a mountain's ledge, only a few roads in and a few roads out and surrounded by forest. And you think, if I were to do this all over again, would you really build a community there, knowing what we know now? And I think that's the challenge for societies, because telling people they can't go home, man, that's hard to do. But you're seeing it, you're seeing it in all sorts of unique ways. Houston is figuring out ways to move people out through buyback programs. The Hurricane Sandy relief had a buyback provision for certain areas that were impacted by Hurricane Sandy, just basically pay people not to go back and to protect life.
Yeah, it truly is it's an interesting conundrum, right?
Yeah.
I like to think about it, and after I saw the piece, I almost related it to what the expression in boxing, right? To throw in the towel, which I guess there might be this, I don't know, this macho kind of thing to, oh, you're not supposed to quit or whatever that attitude is. But the thought is that, you live to fight another day, or whatever you can apply that to. And it really does apply to these wildfires in the sense where, if you don't make the right decisions, you may not be there for to fight that next day. It's interesting as well to think about the forest almost like a big body of water, right? With the WUI, the wild the wildlife urban interface. Thank you. For people almost to have to live in it almost like water, which look at any flood, my gosh, it just levels communities. It's catastrophic. But
well, I mean, you know, also, I mean, we're talking during a pandemic. It's not a pandemic. We can live, I mean, if we did this better, and this is what the work I'm doing 90% of my time now, we can live, other countries have showed us that you can live and adapt around COVID, right? Just like it was seawater rising or a fire. But you have, right? We're not going to go to bars like we used to. We're not going to shake hands or breathe on each other like we used to. We're going to mask a lot more, but that's okay. I mean, that's how you learn to adapt to these new threats. And rather than thinking, you know, oh, paradise happened, that was bad, let's go back, right? And as you know, the intensity of paradise was in no small measure not just to generic climate change in the sense of man-made climate change, but also because of how people in paradise had decided to live, which was the very, very dense forests and wildland. And then that ended up being the thing that they could not stop once it caught fire.
The real unfortunate part of all of this is that you did your piece. It was just, I want to say it was around this time, about a year ago. We published it in December of 2019.
Yeah. Is that right? I couldn't remember. Yeah.
But with, of course, the campfire was in 2018, and you had
right. We were there
and you had thrown out a statistic saying basically all of the largest fires in California's history have all pretty much occurred very recently. Fast forward literally just a year to 2 years later, here we are almost wrapping up 2020, and California's 10 largest wildfires ever have now occurred since the year 2000. 5 of those 10 have been this year alone. So
2020.
Correct. So to see that statistic literally, explode and spread like a fire,
right?
It seems like people really have to come to the realization here that there's something that could potentially be something else going on, and that, you really can point it to climate change. What did you learn, and what did you see firsthand when you were there in paradise to see these effects of climate change? Just all that dry fuel around you too.
All the dry fuel. I mean, that's what, and we did this with Miles O'Brien. His production team did it, but obviously Miles O'Brien is also understands the science and the nature of it. And I remember, these aha moments, because I'm always thinking about this in terms of response and preparedness, and I view myself, as a consumer of the smart people like you and Miles who sort of know the science, but so the combination of drier land because of less rain, right, and then intense rain, which leads to more forestation, like lots of more brush, right? Combined with wind, increased wind, which climate change is a contributing factor to, and then
California's under a major drought as well.
Yeah, right. So you have it's just the dryness that ends up acting like a fuel. And then if you have too dense of forestry, there's nothing to stop the fuel. So it's going from tree to branch to tree to branch to what's on the forest floor. And so that all of them together just create this toxic, flammable opportunity that then just plows through a community that no amount of firefighter training can account for. And that's the scary thing.
Wildfires, from having covered it, working in local news, I mean, you've covered, you want to talk about some major events in the history of the world. You've been there for a lot of them, but at least in my experience, going to wildfires, or at least the aftermath and kind of current state of it, I covered the what were they? The Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, Gatlinburg wildfires several years ago, and that was my first experience ever seeing it firsthand. I had seen tornado damage, straight line wind damage, ice storm aftermath, pretty much all of it, flooding, everything, but not fires, not a wildfire. And that was my first experience with it. It's really hard to explain. I'm going to try my best. It just feels, it's very eerie. I don't know. And you were there, after the fire had already finished, and it's kind of a scarred landscape, but it's just this very eerie feeling knowing that this thing just showed up and everything is gone.
At one stage we stopped a sort of car graveyard, and any other community would have just been, there's old cars or whatever. And then you think, okay, they're burned out. And then you think they're burned out and they were on the street, and that's the street where everyone. So I mean, basically, you're looking at cars where people died in, right? Because that's where most of the deaths occurred, was people obviously trying to evacuate, right? And there's a single lane, and so that's it's exactly right. It's that eerie feeling, but it's juxtaposed against just the absolute beauty of places like that. I mean,
it's like people are living there, right?
And the attitude of the people that, it was just it's like, you're in Florida, I'm in New England, like it's like, we just sort of, each of them are caricatures of personality, but like, I mean, just people who things are slower, in a good way. Like, they're people who are taking the long view, and that long view now is the sustainability of even communities like Paradise, because of these consistent fires that you're seeing now, as you highlight. Like in 2020, I mean, 2019 was like foreplay, right? I mean, and when you think about it now, 2018 was just, I mean, now you're right. I mean, like that's where we are now, and
it's escalated.
2021, and that you're doing all this in the middle of a pandemic as well, which has impact on things like, the things I worry about, evacuation and sheltering, right? You really want to, yes, there's a fire, you got to evacuate people. Wait a second, I've been telling them for 6 months to stay put. That's a huge challenge right now, just a unique challenge for 2020. Hopefully unique only for 2020. We'll see.
Unless we forget as well, it's a major election year when it comes to policy. People getting out to the ballots and voting is the best way that you can affect change.
Right. And I should say, I mean, on the federal level, there's obviously a divide between Republicans and Democrats, and their acceptance of science. And I won't get too political, but what I've noticed, and you follow me on Twitter for my politics, but like what I've noticed, being at Homeland Security, working with state and locals, is if you're a mayor and you're Republican or a Democrat, but you're a mayor in a place like Paradise or Miami or Houston County, where the county is more conservative than the city, you don't have the option to deny this, right? Because it's your duty as a public official. So even though the national politics are hugely divided, and there's of course science denialists and climate change, or climate mitigation mayors, and all the things that you're seeing in California, for example, it really does. This is just like, this is something that if you are responsible for human life, you can't afford to have politics, because you're just seeing how this plays out. And so the politics of this, I should say, two things on the Homeland Security front, sort of so if I think about the Homeland Security threats that we face, and this is what I teach, and I worry about borderless threats now. So like the state threats, I still worry about Russia and China and stuff, but like you worry about terrorism and radicalization, about pandemics, obviously, right? Cybersecurity, and our networks, and climate change. Of those four, and I'm talking to you in the middle of a pandemic, only one is an existential crisis, and that's climate change, because it's going to change the way we have to think about how we live. It's going to impact national security as you have climate refugees, as there's scarce resources. Why do wars start? Scarce resources, as our military is unable to deploy because our Navy is, losing bases to water, which is happening, and losing airfields to hurricanes, which is happening. And so, we really have to think differently. That's the bad news. The good news is, because I think of this realization, and because of advocates, and because environmental advocates are now, not just talking about mitigation, but also talking about our response capabilities and adaptation, and sort of accepting to change that. Because for a long while, just the politics of this were interesting, that environmental activists did not want to talk about adaptation because they thought it was sort of giving in, right? That we can still do mitigation. You can do both. I think that combination means that climate change denialists will look like flat Earth denialists within the next 20 years, or pandemic time denialists in a week. And I think that the politics of this will begin to change over time.
That's we can only hope, right? But it seems that people are more and more obsessed with, oh, that fire was started by arson. This was started
Yeah,
by this. This was started. That's not, it didn't happen because the earth willed it to happen.
yeah,
Nor did the campfire. The campfire was started by that arcing wire out,
yeah,
away from people that sparked this landscape. So it's not necessarily about the source of
no,
fires. Most of them are human
right,
related, or at least not started by something
yeah,
like lightning, right? So it's not so much about the source of those fires. It's about, as you put it, this atmosphere. Really, the stage is set, right? So we
but
go
look, I mean, oh,
right
sorry.
into it, and we go straight
Yeah,
into fourth gear, and you're just redlining.
right. No, I mean, I think it's right. And I think so. It does remind me a lot, and because I do with gun control, so it reminds me of the gun control debate. So we obsess over, think about Columbine or any of these, whose names Dylan, I mean, we obsess over the triggering event
Mm.
that led someone to do something horrible. I mean, think of our obsession with the Columbine killers or our obsession with Dylan Roof. I mean, sort of they become, or the Cyrenov brothers here in Boston with the Boston Marathon, right? You become obsessed with the narrative of the perpetrator rather than the experience of the survivors and victims. And I do think that has changed over the last couple of years. That we now we're looking at the systemic narrative, right? The connective tissue of all these different massive moments of gun violence and saying, okay, there's a systemic problem here. And I think that our laws haven't changed, but they've changed on a local level. Remember, again, a lot of stuff, but the trajectory it will start to head in the right direction. I'm pretty confident of that because the narrative has changed. It has gone from what was the reason why? I could care less why, right? A crazy guy had guns. But that's my consistent story is the person had guns or a gun, right? And so I think to think about the climate change narrative as similar, like, yeah, it was an arsonist, or it was negligent campers, or it was a negligent energy company or electricity company, but at some stage, it doesn't matter. You're just looking at the consequences. And so I do think it takes a while, and it takes political courage and narratives like what you all are doing in terms of getting people to realize, what, it doesn't really matter, you know, what that moment was, who lit the match,
Right.
right? The match was there. The match was there.
So again, Juliette, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It truly is a blast. I mean, let alone talking to you about wildfires or climate change, to talk to you about policy or whatever, just to pick your brain is really exciting. But when it comes to something like climate change, you touched on, we want to play the long game, and I do agree with you, because you got to take it, I guess, slowly to get kind of everybody on board, I guess. But it's something like climate change. There's a timer, right? There's almost, we're running out of time to make that effective change to how we're going to move forward.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I mean, in some ways, we do have to get more aggressive now and think of all the different tools that we can use to protect ourselves now, from disaster relief funding to education to how we build, to even criminal laws, as you're seeing being utilized against some of these very negligent companies that are sort of contributing to it. And obviously, if times change, sort of a recommitment to a global, climate mitigation policy. But I always, I have an upbeat personality. I always want to leave on a good note. You have to have an upbeat personality if you're in disaster management, which is, consistently the polling of the generation 12 to 18, 12 to 22, actually, across urban, rural, Republican, Democrat, male, female, black, white, any other ethnicity or race. Their number one priority is climate change. So we've done something right? I mean, in the bad, all the bad news and the narratives like what you all do, which I think is so important, being able to sort of communicate this in a really accessible way, right? I mean, that is key to educating a new generation, which will view, right, a world that doesn't deal with climate change in the same way that I view a world that, that doesn't have rights for the LGBT community, or doesn't hasn't reformed on a variety of social issues. And so yes, time is of the essence, but something is right, something is going right, and we basically need to step aside and let them take charge. I think that's the answer.
We are well on our way. Of course,
I'm tired.
If you want to follow Juliette on Twitter, she is a prolific Twitterer. It is just at Juliette Kayyem, her name. You can find her there. Of course, you can find her on the YouTube channel, in the MyRadar app, in that Paradise story, which I will, of course, put in the description of this video. I'll put it up in the corner. Click on that I button so you can see it too. For Juliette Kayyem, I have been meteorologist Mike Linden from MyRadar. Stay safe out there, everybody. We'll catch you in the next one.
Follow MyRadar on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Download MyRadar on iOS, Android, Amazon Alexa, Xbox, and Windows.